The small town gym buzzed with energy, the rhythmic pounding of gloves against punching bags echoing through the air. In the corner, under the bright fluorescent lights, stood Liam, a fearless, disciplined boxer with a reputation for never backing down. He had the sharp reflexes of a champion, the confidence of a fighter, and the kind of intensity that made people step aside when he walked past. But outside the ring, his life was a different kind of battle, one he had never learned how to fight. Just a few blocks away, in a quiet, sunlit classroom, Sophie rearranged a stack of books on her desk, taking a deep breath before her students arrived. She had always been the quiet one, the kind of person who found comfort in the world of words rather than the noise of reality. Teaching was her passion, but confidence? That was something she was still learning. Unlike Liam, Sophie's battles weren't fought with fists and footwork, they were waged in her heart, in the self-doubt that sometimes crept into her mind. Their worlds were never meant to collide. Yet fate, as unpredictable as a stray punch, had other plans. It started with a chance meeting at a local coffee shop. Liam, fresh from a brutal training session, stood in line behind Sophie, his hands still wrapped in tape, the scent of sweat and determination clinging to him. Sophie, buried in a book, hadn't noticed him until she turned, startled by his presence. Their eyes met, hers filled with hesitation, his with quiet intrigue. It was a fleeting moment, but something unspoken passed between them, something neither of them could quite define. But it wasn't just one meeting. The universe kept pulling them together in the most unexpected ways. A broken-down car outside the gym, a shared bench at the park, a rainy evening under the same awning. Each moment chipped away at the walls they had built around themselves. For the first time in his life, Liam found himself wanting to protect something beyond the ring. And Sophie? She felt a courage she had never known before, a desire to step into a world that once terrified her. But love is never that simple. And as their connection deepened, so did the obstacles in their way. Secrets from the past, fears they couldn't outrun, and a decision that could change everything. Would they fight for each other, or would the battle be too much to bear? Liam had never been one for deep conversations, but something about Sophie made him want to talk, to say things he had never said out loud before. She listened in a way that made him feel seen, not just as a boxer, not just as someone people admired for his strength, but as a person with fears, doubts, and dreams beyond the ring. It was unfamiliar territory, and yet he found himself drawn to it. Sophie, on the other hand, had always stayed in her comfort zone. She had spent years carefully avoiding risks, choosing routine over uncertainty. But Liam wasn't like anyone she had ever known. He was intense, unfiltered, and completely sure of himself, everything she wasn't. And yet, when they were together, she didn't feel small or invisible. She felt alive. But life wasn't a simple love story. Liam's world was built on discipline and sacrifice. Boxing wasn't just a sport for him. It was his escape, his survival. Every match, every punch, every bruise was a step closer to something bigger, something he had been fighting for his entire life. He couldn't afford distractions, and yet Sophie had become exactly that. For Sophie, the past wasn't so easily forgotten. She had learned early on that love came with a cost, and that opening her heart could mean opening herself to pain. There were things she hadn't told Liam, things she wasn't sure she ever could. And then, there was the unspoken tension growing between them. Liam's coach had warned him, love and boxing didn't mix. "You can't have both," he had said. "Not if you want to win." And Liam wanted to win. He had spent years proving himself, clawing his way up from nothing. A championship fight was on the horizon, and the stakes had never been higher. Sophie saw it too. The bruises on his skin, the exhaustion in his eyes. She worried about him, about the toll it was taking. But Liam never slowed down. He never let his guard down, except with her. And that scared her, because the closer they got, the more she realized the truth. Love wasn't just about finding someone, it was about fighting for them. But was she ready for that fight? And more importantly, was Liam? Liam trained harder than ever, pushing his body past its limits. Every morning, he was up before the sun, running miles through the empty streets. Every night, he stayed at the gym long after the others had left, sweat dripping from his face as he punched the bag again and again. He told himself he was focused, that nothing could distract him, not even Sophie. But he knew that was a lie. She was always in the back of his mind, her voice cutting through the chaos, her presence lingering even when she wasn't there. He wanted to see her, to hear her laugh, to lose himself in the quiet world they had built together. But each time he reached for his phone, he stopped himself. He couldn't afford to get too close. He had worked too hard to let emotions slow him down now. Sophie noticed the distance. At first, she told herself it was just his training, that it had nothing to do with her. But as the days passed, the space between them grew wider, and the silence stretched longer. One evening, she decided to see him at the gym. The place smelled of sweat and adrenaline, the air thick with the sounds of fists hitting bags and trainers barking instructions. Liam was in the ring, sparring with another fighter, his movements sharp and unforgiving. She watched as he took hit after hit, refusing to back down, his jaw clenched with determination. When he finally saw her, something flickered in his eyes, relief, maybe even regret. But then his coach clapped a hand on his shoulder, pulling his focus back. "No distractions, kid," he muttered. Sophie felt like an outsider, standing there in a place that wasn't hers. For the first time, she wondered if she had been foolish to believe she could be part of his world. Later that night, Liam found her sitting alone at the park, her arms wrapped around herself. "I didn't mean to shut you out," he said, his voice low. She looked up, her eyes searching his. "Then why does it feel like you are?" He didn't have an answer, because the truth was, he didn't know how to be both things at once, the fighter and the man who wanted something more. And the deeper they fell, the more impossible it seemed to have both. But life had a way of forcing choices, and soon, one of them would have to make theirs. Liam could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him, the relentless training, the expectations, the championship fight that was only days away. But more than anything, it was Sophie, or rather, the fear of losing her. They hadn't spoken much since that night at the park. Sophie had pulled back, and maybe he had let her. It was easier that way, or at least that's what he kept telling himself. But late at night, when the gym was empty and the adrenaline had worn off, she was all he could think about. Sophie, meanwhile, had spent the past week convincing herself to walk away. She had told herself that Liam had made his choice, and she needed to accept it. But no matter how much she tried, she couldn't silence the part of her that wanted to fight for him. Then came the night before his big fight. The gym was buzzing with excitement, everyone talking about how this was Liam's moment, his chance to prove himself to the world. But while the rest of the city saw a rising champion, Sophie saw something else, a man standing at the edge of something he wasn't sure he wanted. She found him alone in the locker room, staring at his taped-up hands, lost in thought. "Liam," she said softly, stepping closer. He looked up, surprised to see her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, almost reluctantly, he whispered, "I don't know if I can do this." It wasn't the fight he was talking about, and Sophie knew it. "You don't have to do it alone," she said, her voice steady. Liam exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I don't know how to be anything else, Sophie. This is all I've ever known. Her heart ached for him, for the boy who had spent his whole life fighting, never knowing what it was like to just be. You don't have to choose between who you are and who you love, she said. But if you keep pushing me away, one day I won't be here to come back. The words hit harder than any punch he had ever taken. Outside, the lights of the arena burned bright, the sound of the crowd already filling the air. His moment was coming. But first, he had to decide if he was ready to fight for something bigger than the ring. The roar of the crowd grew louder, vibrating through the walls of the locker room. Liam could hear the announcer hyping up the fight, the trainers giving last-minute instructions, the cameras flashing. This was everything he had worked for, everything he had sacrificed for. And yet, Sophie's words echoed louder than all of it. If you keep pushing me away, one day I won't be here to come back. He wanted to believe she was wrong, that she would always be there, waiting for him when the fights were over. But deep down, he knew. People didn't wait forever. And Sophie wasn't the kind of person to hold on to something that wasn't holding her back. Liam, you ready? His coach's voice cut through his thoughts. He clenched his fists, pushing everything else aside. There was no room for doubt, not now. He had a fight to win. But just as he was about to step out, his phone buzzed. Normally, he wouldn't check, not before a fight, but something made him glance down. And when he saw the message, his heart stopped. Unknown number. You think you can run from your past? Think again. She deserves to know who you really are. His blood turned to ice. He looked around the locker room, suddenly feeling like the walls were closing in. He hadn't told Sophie everything. Not about where he came from, not about the things he had done before boxing gave him an escape. He had buried it all, convinced himself it was behind him. But someone hadn't forgotten. Another message popped up. Unknown number. Walk away from the fight or I tell her everything. His hands tightened around the phone. He didn't recognize the number, but he knew exactly what this was. A threat. And not just to him, to Sophie. Liam's heart pounded, his breathing uneven. He had never backed down from a fight, never let fear control him. But this wasn't about punches and titles. This was about her. He had two choices. Step into that ring and risk everything being exposed, or walk away and lose everything he had fought for. Liam! His coach grabbed his arm. Come on, it's time. Time. But he didn't have time. Not to think, not to fix this. Sophie was out there somewhere, probably sitting in the crowd, waiting for him. She had no idea that someone was watching them, that someone wanted to use his past to destroy the future they barely had. His mind raced. If he walked away now, it would all be over. His career, his reputation, everything he had built. But if he stayed, if he fought, the truth would come out. And Sophie might never look at him the same way again. For the first time in his life, Liam wasn't sure what the right fight was. And outside, the bell rang, signaling the beginning of the match, while the real battle had only just begun. Liam stepped into the ring, his heartbeat drowning out the cheers of the crowd. The bright overhead lights felt blinding, the pressure heavier than ever. His opponent stood across from him, ready, fists clenched. But Liam's mind wasn't on the fight. It was on the message, on the unknown threat hanging over him like a blade. The bell rang. Instinct took over. He dodged the first hit, countered with a sharp jab, but his movements were off. He wasn't fully there, and his opponent could tell. A hard punch landed against his ribs, then another clipped his jaw. The crowd gasped. Somewhere in the stands, Sophie watched, her chest tightening. She had seen Liam fight before, but this was different. He wasn't himself. Something was wrong. Liam knew he had seconds to make a decision. Keep fighting and risk everything coming out, or throw the match, walk away, and protect Sophie from the past that was threatening to pull them both under. Then, in the blur of movement, he saw her, Sophie, and something inside him snapped back into place. The next hit came, but this time he was ready. He blocked, countered, and within seconds, he was back in control. He fought not just with his fists, but with everything he had left: his fears, his doubts, his past. The final round came faster than he expected. His opponent threw one last punch, but Liam was quicker. A brutal uppercut sent the other fighter to the mat. The referee counted. The crowd held their breath. 10! The stadium erupted. Liam had won. But as the referee raised his arm in victory, his chest tightened, because the real fight wasn't over. Back in the locker room, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number, big win, champ. But I warned you, now she finds out everything. Liam didn't hesitate. He turned and walked straight out of the arena, searching for Sophie. He found her just outside, standing near the exit, her arms crossed. "You won," she said, but there was something in her eyes, uncertainty, worry. "But you weren't really there, were you?" Liam exhaled. "There's something I need to tell you." Before he could speak, her phone vibrated. She looked down at the screen, and Liam saw the color drain from her face. Someone had beaten him to it. And as she read the message, her hands trembling, Liam realized he wasn't just fighting for her anymore. Now, he was fighting to keep her from walking away forever. Sophie's hands shook as she read the message. Liam saw the way her expression shifted: confusion, disbelief, then something deeper: hurt. He felt it like a punch to his chest. "Sophie, whatever you read, let me explain," he said, his voice tight. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Is it true?" Liam swallowed hard. He had spent years trying to outrun his past, building a new life, a new identity. But no matter how fast he moved forward, it had finally caught up with him. And now, it was standing between him and the only person he had ever truly wanted to fight for. "Yes," he admitted, "but it's not the whole story." She turned away, pacing, her mind racing. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was scared," he said honestly. "Scared that you'd look at me the way you are now." Sophie exhaled, running a hand through her hair. She had spent her life avoiding risks, protecting herself from heartbreak. And now, standing here, she was faced with the hardest decision of all: walk away or stay and face the truth with him. "Liam, I don't care about your past. I care about who you are now," she finally said, her voice softer. "But I need to know that you trust me enough to let me in. No more secrets." Liam stepped closer, his heart pounding. "No more secrets," he promised. For a long moment, they stood there, the weight of everything settling between them. Then, slowly, Sophie reached for his hand. And just like that, the fight was over. Not the one in the ring, not the one against his past, but the one he had been waging within himself. Liam had spent his whole life fighting battles alone, but for the first time, he didn't have to. As they walked away from the arena, the noise of the world fading behind them, he realized something. Winning wasn't about titles or fame. It was about knowing who you were fighting for. And this time, he had finally won something that mattered.